The sudden and shocking death of Baelor's kingly brother, Daeron I, the young dragon, put him on the throne, a place he probably never expected to be, yet when he got there, he probably saw it as ordained. Or, if he didn't, he certainly treated it that way after the fact. He had grown up in the shadow of a hyper-aggressive brother, who in turn came from a long line of dragon riders, conquerors, rulers, people who got their way. Now, Baelor had all the confidence and self-assuredness of those ancestors. He may have had some of their madness too, we'll see, but in some of the most vital ways, he was their exact opposite. Like many who came before him, though, like many who have real-world absolute power, he wanted to impose his will on all his subjects, but his will was just so unlike so many of those others, both fictional and non-fictional. Like Aegon I and Daeron I, Baelor wanted Dorne, but through overwhelming peace instead of the usual tried and true and repeatedly failing overwhelming violence. Like those men, he thought he knew what was best. And these extremes had predictably extreme results, or not so predictably in some cases, because, again, this is methods that hadn't been tried before. It's part of why he's so well remembered. Yet, ironically, he's also why so many other things have been forgotten, because he destroyed them. And of course, I'm talking about all those books he burned. We've told the story of his youth. Now is the time for his reign. King Baelor was a man of the seven, and he would rule like one. And returning to discuss him is our resident Baelor expert, Nina. We've got all that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome back, everybody. It's another episode of History of Westeros, and we're here with a part 2. This episode definitely works as a standalone. We have a nice even divide between Baelor's pre-kingly days and the first thing he did when ascending to this episode, which should capture all of his actual reign. So, welcome back, Nina, to discuss that. How you doing, Nina? And tell everybody again where to find you, because, you know, we can't say it often enough.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. I am Nina. I write on Tumblr on goodqueenalley.tumblr.com. And Aziz, how many L's are there in alley?
Just the one, actually. I've done my research and double-checked. It is just one. That's right. 2 N's, though. Yeah, no. But in the full version of Alisan, yeah.
Well, technically 3 N's because Good Queen.
Good
Queen
right.
Alley. So it's an N and then 2 N's in Alisan. But no, so I'm writing over there. I'm writing anything and everything over there. I was actually just writing an ask not too long ago about Jon and Ygritte and where her attraction to Jon may have come from. So It's all over the board as to where I write things.
Yeah, A Song of Ice and Fire is a wide open sandbox. There are so many questions, you never know what you'll get. And that is why it's worth checking out goodqueenalley.tumblr.com.
Last time.
We pick up the action with Baelor taking the throne upon his brother's untimely and unexpected death, right? Immediately taking the reins, rather than slowly adjusting to the crown and letting his experienced uncle Viserys, Hand of the King, take over. That was the last thing we talked about in part 1, was how many, including probably Viserys himself, expected him to keep ruling his hand, because Daeron spent most of his reign in Dorne trying to conquer it or reconquering it or settling it or etc. Just not back at the Red Keep ruling. So this was quite a surprising decision for maybe just about everyone, except perhaps Baelor himself, to immediately start giving orders and doing things differently. And he made this very surprising decision to pardon the hostages. But that in turn, over time, probably became not very shocking, given the other things that would follow. It was like, oh my gosh, he freed the hostages. That's wild. But that in time would look like a kind of a small thing, given all the things that would follow. He started his very unusual reign, shall we say, doing things kind of the opposite as you would expect. Like normally when a king or queen or any sort of ruler takes over, they kind of gather everyone to them and say, hey, everybody, acknowledge me as the ruler, bend the knee, you know. I'll dress up and we'll do all the circumstance and the rituals and all that. But it's not really what Baelor did, is it? He not only did he not bring people to him, he left. He went out on a very long walk. But To be fair, this wasn't just any ordinary walk. This was truly, in my opinion and many others, the walk of walks. The walk to end all walks, except for perhaps the way back, because he repeated this exact journey on his way home. Let's first just appreciate the stamina and determination, right? I mean, just this alone proves he's not a weak man, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And this is, what I want to take account for is not just the physical toll of this, which is huge, and it cannot be overstated. I mean, he is taking on this almost impossible, physically impossible task to do this, but he's also doing so in an extremely precarious position dynastically, because Baelor has no heir. He has no children. He does not have any other brothers. If he dies, it is wildly unclear who takes over for him. And I doubt he left it very clear when he left as to what would happen, because I don't think he thought he would die. So you're imagining this court that is probably not hearing from him for days, weeks, maybe even months at a time as he's doing this walk, and thinking, where is our king? Is he even alive? Is he going to survive this walk? And if he doesn't, what does that mean for the succession? I mean, by comparison, look at where Dany's court in Meereen is after she leaves on Drogon. They have no idea if he is alive or dead. They have no idea if he is ever coming back. And you can see how relatively quickly power breaks down in that court, how factions start to split off. And now imagine that's going on over the course of months.
Yeah, months. That's a good point, because this walk takes that long. And you can liken it to a tightrope walk, because like you say, the succession is not at all clear. Baelor himself hasn't laid anything out. He hasn't done the normal things a king would do upon taking the reins. He just goes out and does this, and nobody's sure what he wants exactly. And on the other side, the Dornish, this is a melting pot of options here, and some good, some bad. A lot of Dornish people probably recognize this as a rare opportunity to have a peaceful relationship with the Iron Throne, a king who actually seems to respect them, or at least respect the idea of peace. Yet, a lot of other people also see that and specifically don't want it. They're like, oh, no, we don't want a peace with the Iron Throne. We would rather see a warlike or foolish man on the Iron Throne that we can get things from through violence, that we can keep our war industry, so to speak, not literally war industry, but keep our traditions of war and things like that going. And so it really could have gone either way. And you also just have to appreciate just how public it is. He probably didn't put out flyers, but doing something this dramatic and different, it really got the attention of the entire realm. It's quite an interesting and clever way to do what's effectively a coronation. Instead of getting everybody to come to him and observe him on top of the throne and see him in his regal bearing, everybody every day for months was probably like thinking about this walk and what was happening and what might happen next. And it's kind of a clever way to get everyone's attention in a way that doesn't look like you're trying to get everyone's attention. Not only was he not weak, he wasn't stupid.
No. Well, and the thing is, I think that this is a very deliberate statement on Baelor's part. Baelor is coming out and he is saying, I am quite literally putting my body on the line because I am that dedicated to peace. I want to show you in the most dramatic way possible, I will do everything and anything to make peace with you, the Prince of Dorne. So if you want me to dress in sackcloth, that's what I will do. I will walk. I will go barefoot. I will make these hostages the guests of honor on this walk. I am not just going to return them to you. I'm going to put them in the honored position, and I am going to take the humble position because I want to make it the most explicitly clear as I can. I am doing this to get peace. I am not a conqueror. I am not continuing my brother's war.
Yes, well said. And it's interesting to think about the small details here. Like the Kingsguard who died at his brother's side. And what must they have thought when they were told, oh, you're not coming with, you're staying here. Like, wait, no, our place is by the king, especially when he's leaving. Like, nope, actually, the king is, what's the famous line? Your place is where the king says it is. Even Cersei agreed with that when it came down to it.
You bring that up, and I think about Barristan in A Dance with Dragons. He has
Yes.
that moment where he thinks, why am I alive when so many kings under my watch have died? And obviously, there's not anything practically that Barristan could have done to stop any of those kings from dying. But if there's this sense of Barristan who is so much Kingsguard is part of his identity that he's thinking, if I'm the Kingsguard, fundamentally, my job is to die so that the king goes on living. That is my job description. So if I'm alive, in a way, I fail to do my job because the king is not alive. And so I feel like if you're talking about Baelor's reign, Daeron was just killed in the presence of several of his Kingsguard. And so you've got these Kingsguard at home who are probably thinking, I want to sort of redeem the name of the Kingsguard. I want to show that, no, I would die for you. I would defend you with my life. And now they're being told, oh, no. You stay home while the king risks his life.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic because this is where I think Baelor's cleverness and giving him some credit for forethought comes into it, is that he knows that not only does he want to make the show of peace, which means not having swords at his side, which the Kingsguard are some of the finest knights in the Seven Kingdoms, supposedly, but he doesn't want their paranoia, their nervousness, their edginess when he's trying to talk to them. They are going to remember what just happened to their brethren and to his brother, and they're going to be nervous. They're going to be like, this is the same people that just murdered your brother and our brethren, and we don't want that to happen again. And here you, like, they didn't invite us here. You're walking there just saying, here I come. So, not to mention all the other things we said about some people would want him dead, potentially, to return things to the prior status quo. Dorne wants to keep fighting. Some Westerosi might want to murder Baelor to keep the status quo. Some Marcher Lords even, things like that. Of course, that's not what happens. We're not told that there any attempts on his life are even made, but you can see why those fears would be reasonable and entertained, and someone like a Kingsguard would be like, we're, like Nina said, our job is supposed to give our body for the king, and we can't do that if we're not there. And this brings up a historical parallel, doesn't it?
It does. So, we mentioned last time Henry VI as a parallel for Baelor, and I very much believe that he is. And there's points in which I feel like there's very specific parallels between Henry VI and Baelor, and this is one of them. Henry VI comes to the throne. Obviously, he is the heir of his father, Henry V, the great victor of Agincourt. And one of the individuals who was taken at Agincourt was Charles, Duke of Orleans. And he's kept as a prisoner for the better part of 3 decades at the English court. And when Henry VI comes into his majority, he becomes king. He actually releases him, and he says, "I'm going to release you to try to make a peace negotiation with the French court, with Charles VII of France." And so he lets him go. It didn't work. He didn't make a peace negotiation, and he never came back either. He didn't pay his ransom, and he didn't come back. Not a great idea on Henry VI's part. And Henry VI was also someone who, in addition to freeing this hostage, just the way that Baelor does, he also welcomed French envoys. He didn't literally dress in sackcloth the way that Baelor did, but there is a peace conference or attempts at peace that Henry VI hosts. And when these French envoys come, it is notable how welcoming Henry is to them. He is actually taking off his hat. He is going to them. He is taking them by the hand. And although it may sound silly to us, in modern terms, keep in mind, this is an era where the body of the king is literally sacred. So the fact that the king is taking off his hat, is going to these envoys, is taking them by the hand, is actually correcting his English representatives and saying, no, your language isn't nice enough to the French. It's showing them, I am trying to make a peace. I'm going so far that I'm actually, I'm kind of looking a little bit naive and a little bit foolish in the eyes of his English subjects, because he's coming across as going way too far, going farther than a king should to try to make peace.
That's amazing. So, of course, it must be, at least for a moment, we should look through the eyes of the hostages that went with him, because he personally walked them back to Dorne. As part of this. It wasn't just the peace walk, it was returning the hostages as part of this. And then once he got there were peace negotiations. So on the way, most days would have been pretty uneventful, just a very slow walk of a strange young man in bare feet walking all the way to Dorne. And I imagine the mood amongst the hostages was first there'd have been relief at first because at first they expected to die. So there may have been a few days or even weeks of, well, this is all extra time that we're getting. Like, no one would have expected us to survive after this, only because this most random guy inherited the throne that we happen to be surviving. But then they're seeing his behavior day to day as they're walking through the thing. They're like, gosh, I really wish he would have taken ship. This is really slow. Because even if they're riding, the whole procession is going at the pace of his walking. So it is slow. And remember where they're walking through. The desert. For a little while they're in the Stormlands. It's probably not so bad. But then they're like, oh gosh, this is hot and we're going slowly and So, yeah, it's better than dying, but
Well, and I imagine it must have been so uncomfortable, especially going through areas like the Dornish Marches. Yeah. Because on the one hand, they're with the king, so no one is actually going to do anything to them. None of his subjects are going to out and out attack him. But they're probably getting a lot of really hostile stares, a lot of really uncomfortable language being thrown at them, a lot of really angry emotions. They can probably feel it, and they probably feel so uncomfortable because on the one hand, they're going back to Dorne. Great, that's fantastic. But on the other hand, this has all been a violent reversal of fortune. Who's to say there's not going to be another violent reversal of fortune along the way? And then what happens to them? It must have just been so strange and uncomfortable, I have to imagine.
Yeah, just this weird little young skinny barefoot guy is the only thing keeping them alive. Like, that must feel really weird to a martial culture. Like, they would kill us in a second for a number of reasons, if not for this guy. And what a weird world it is that a man who looks like that is the one keeping us alive. So, very, very long walk. Of course, they pass the cage holding Aemon on the way, and that, of course, is important. And something that Baelor, is annoyed by. He's mad at the Wills, but they refuse to do anything about it. At this point, there's no peace deal, so he doesn't really have much he can say other than to impress them in how far he's walked so far, which, the Wills are a pretty nasty bunch from what we're told. So that if they were impressed by that, they certainly wouldn't say so. They're too busy laughing at keeping Aemon in a cage. Anyway, so he goes on, the rest of the hostages. Everybody keeps going. They finally get all the way to Sunspear. Again, just remind yourself, take a look at the map of how far that is. It is so darn far. So he would have looked a little different by the time he got there. It would have been, browner, wrinklier. His feet would have been just, I don't even know. The level of callus is unprecedented. Just Targaryen calluses. Yeah, the most. He had the most Targaryen, the most calloused feet of the Targaryen regime for sure, definitely. So we're not told a whole lot about what happened when he gets to Sunspear. We're told basically the result. We're told the peace negotiations. There's a lot we can imagine about the Prince of Dorne being impressed and maybe a little relieved that Baelor actually made it all the way. He didn't change his mind and say, okay, I've had enough of this. Let's ride the rest of the way. No, he actually did it. He completed the whole journey. By then, that must have been impressive because, again, we're talking about day to day. People were getting news on this and keeping an eye on it, and it would have been impressive once it, unfoldingly, day by day, be like, man, this guy really is going to do it, isn't he? He's like 2/3 of the way there now, and just think about that every day. It's like he's getting a little closer. So the Dornish were probably kind of impressed, yet they wouldn't want to, make a big deal out of. He's still an enemy at this point. He's still a Targaryen, so it must have been a kind of a weird mood when he got there. Like, they would have been happy to have the hostages back, but still, this is what are they to make of this guy?
Well, and I think also, if I'm the Prince of Dorne, I'm thinking, okay, well, great. The king on the Iron Throne doesn't want to make war with me. He wants to return the hostages. He wants to return my subjects. He wants to make peace. Fantastic. What happens tomorrow? Because yesterday, the king was someone who was very much wanting to make war, wanting to take our hostages, wanting to make Dorne essentially an imperial province of the Iron Throne. If today we've got a peace-loving king, is tomorrow we're going to get another warmonger king? This is sort of the problem of personal monarchy. Policy is what the person of the monarch decides that it is. And so if I'm the Prince of Dorne, I'm thinking, well, I want to make a peace that's going to be a little more lasting than however long this guy that might look like he's on death's door by this point is going to last.
Yeah, because like we said, he's young, but if he keeps doing stuff like this, how long is he going to last? And if and they may have also been some worry in the back of the Prince of Dorne's mind, and maybe others, maybe not in the back, maybe in the front. It's like, is the Seven Kingdoms really going to keep this guy? Is the Iron Throne really going to tolerate this guy? He seems maybe like the kind of guy they might just, do away with secretly and pretend like, oh, he had an accident or something. So exactly, there's a number of reasons why they might not feel secure in a reign of Baelor either, but it was an opportunity. It was a great chance for peace. So they had a reason to go with it, which is ultimately what happened. Whatever their reservations may have been, they did agree to a betrothal, right? And not an immediate marriage. We're talking about something down the line. And it was an interesting choice of Daeron, his namesake of his brother, who would eventually be Daeron II, King Daeron. This is the son of the king who would be Aegon the Unworthy. Now, we said before the succession was kind of uncertain, but there were, because Baelor didn't have children and he only had sisters, but there were a lot of Targaryen males alive, like a decent number. And so what does this tell us? This choice of Daeron, who nobody knew was going to be king eventually at this point. It was by no means a sure thing. It wasn't even likely, but maybe in Baelor's mind it was. Maybe Baelor already knew that the succession would end up going through this line because maybe he had already decided he wasn't going to have his own kids. Basically, what do you think about this choice? It's an interesting choice.
It is an interesting choice. And I think that it may, in fact, imply that Baelor was already thinking about naming Daeron as his heir. I certainly believe that by this point, Baelor had probably decided, I am not going to continue with the marriage, such as it was, between myself and Dana. I definitely don't think that he was planning on having children by Dana, getting married again, doing anything like that to continue his own line. And the way that Baelor acts when he returns to King's Landing suggests to me that he wasn't planning on having any of his sisters or any children by his sisters inherit after him. Now, I don't know how much Baelor was thinking about the succession itself, because I do think that Baelor was more focused on himself as sort of the chosen one of the seven, himself as sort of their agent on Earth to do what they wanted. But I think on a practical level, Baelor would have understood, if I'm not going to have children and I'm trying to make a peace negotiation with the Prince of Dorne, I need to give him something, and I need to give him something that he's gonna want. It doesn't really do the Prince of Dorne any good if I'm marrying his daughter to a random prince who has no influence over policy. And if Baelor is thinking, I don't have an heir, I'm not planning on getting an heir of my own body, I don't want my sisters to have heirs, well, then his only real option is the line of his uncle Viserys. And if he's not necessarily thinking of Viserys, he's certainly not thinking of Aegon, he's maybe thinking of Daeron. Daeron is someone who is young, he can be raised in Baelor's image, maybe he likes the fact that his mother is Nerys, who's also very, very pious. So I think Baelor is probably thinking, yeah, if I don't want to have an heir of my body, and I don't, then Daeron is probably a pretty good choice. And then that assures the Prince of Dorne, here is the future king. So it's not just me you're investing in. We brought that point up before. You're not just investing in what I'm telling you today. You've got an investment in the dynasty in the future. You will have an ear toward the policymaker of the future, not just for this generation.
That's very well put, and it makes a lot of sense, too. You're right that Martells would never agree to marry a lesser Targaryen as part of joining the realm. They just won. They beat the Targaryens back, even though they so arguably, quote unquote, cheated. They still kicked the Targaryens out. Why would they accept a lesser deal after winning, right? Especially to a guy that came with no force of arms and just showed up after walking. So, yeah, they really weren't. He wasn't negotiating from threats. He really was negotiating from more of a perspective of equality, which may have really helped get it done in the first place. Without that threat, it may have been like, hey, look, if you had just done this in the first place, we might have joined the Seven Kingdoms back in the time of your great whoever, Aegon the First, in other words. However many greats you need to throw in there to make that work. As a bit of an aside, it creates the situation on the other side, meaning Mariah Martell, the person who's going to marry Daeron. It gives us a bit of a parallel to Arianne Martell and Quentyn, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And that's specifically because Mariah isn't just the Prince of Dorne's eldest daughter. She is his eldest child, and that's very explicit. And we know, of course, in Dorne, it is, especially with House Martell, it is equal primogeniture. It is whatever child, male or female, inherits as the next prince or princess. So what seems to be the case here, though, because we see eventually Mariah's younger brother, Meryn, becomes Prince of Dorne. This is the one that's going to marry eventually the second Princess Daenerys. And so what we see here, I think, is the unnamed Prince of Dorne, the one who's the father of Mariah and Meryn. I think he probably specifically baked in to this marriage negotiation the idea that Mariah would no longer have the right to inherit Sunspear. And I think that was probably deliberate on his part to make sure, again, as you say, Daeron is an unknown. No one knows at this point what he's going to become as king, and he could be just as much as a warmonger as his namesake. So it's very possible that the Prince of Dorne is thinking, I didn't want Dorne to be conquered by war. I also don't want it to be conquered by marriage. I do not want the future king on the Iron Throne saying, I am Prince of Dorne, sort of Uriaxoris. I'm holding it in right of my wife. I don't want that. You don't get Dorne as Mariah's dowry. Yes, you can marry a Martell princess. Yes, we will do that as a way of negotiating peace. Dorne does not come with her. Dorne is still an independent state.
Absolutely. That's what comes much later. And the reason I pointed it out at the intro and saying, yes, Baelor wanted Dorne, he just didn't do it through violence. Remember what we're told when the other marriage is completed a couple decades from the point we're at now, when Meryn and Daenerys get married, we have this proclamation from Daeron that the dream of Baelor has been brought to life. Something that Baelor probably would have overseen had he lived that long, but spoiler, Baelor doesn't even reach age 30. So that's not enough time for these successive generations. Very long-term plan to work out. He didn't live through the long term. He didn't survive the long term. But like you said, he chose Daeron for a lot of reasons. A, because he thought the dynasty would pass through him, and B, because he was the one that was most likely to carry his legacy forward. In other words, the one who was most likely to behave like Baelor. And that was true, wasn't it? That is pretty much true. We'll get to a little more of that later when we talk about Baelor's legacy. But for now, he chose pretty well. The reason that guy is called Daeron the Good.
No, I would absolutely agree. I think that insofar as you can use the term, I would say Daeron probably thought of himself as Baelor's spiritual successor.
Yeah, well said. That's a good term for it, yeah. A little more of the parallel to Henry VI comes up here, doesn't it?
It does. If we're thinking about Henry VI and Baelor, I think we can, to some extent, compare the marriage betrothal between Mariah and Daeron with the marriage of Henry VI to Margaret of Anjou. Margaret is not technically a member of the French royal family, but he is related by marriage. Her father, René of Anjou, is the brother of Charles VII's queen, Marie of Anjou. So he is a relative of the French royal family, and he is specifically married because it is hoped that she will act as this sort of go-between, as the way of negotiating a peace between England and France. Unfortunately, just as Mariah did not bring Dorne as her dowry, or any lands in Dorne as her dowry, Margaret does a bit of the same. So after they are married, what the English come to find out is Henry agrees to ceding Maine as well as his ancestral claims to the county of Anjou to Margaret's family. And this is a really big deal because so much of the 100 Years' War, and quite frankly, so much of Anglo-French relations for the better part of 4 centuries up to that point, were about English holdings in France. What territories does the King of England hold in France? And Maine is a huge part of that. So for Henry VI to give that up, it is shocking. It is shocking to his subjects that he's willingly ceding part of the kingdom of France that he's holding as right as King of England to a relative of the French royal family without getting any kind of territory, without getting any kind of peace in exchange. Henry thinks this is a good faith move that I'm going to make to try and make a peace. It doesn't work out. They don't get a peace from this. And so the English both lose this territory and they still don't get the peace that Henry wants.
Yeah, and a lot of you will remember the name Margaret of Anjou from the fact that she is considered a major influence on Cersei Lannister, or on George R. R. Martin for Cersei Lannister, shall we say. No, actually, Cersei was a big fan of Margaret growing up and wanted to be like her, yeah. So it's interesting to think about the other aspects of this deal, this arrangement, the marriage between Daron and Mariah that was yet to come. There must have been more to it than that. There must have been some other terms, shall we say. What are some things that you think might have been discussed?
For me, I feel like the most and this is a completely me thing, but because I'm always interested in titles. So one of the things I'm really fascinated by is, would Baelor have said, "I'm not going to use the title King of the Rhoynar anymore"? Because this was a title that Aegon the Conqueror had specifically claimed for himself way back before the Iron Throne was even the Iron Throne. Aegon the Conqueror was calling himself King of the Rhoynar. And so that title is showing, I, the Targaryen king, believe that I am the rightful overlord of all of these people of Dorne who are descended from the Rhoynar. So it's interesting to think, would Baelor have given that up? Would he have said, I'm so committed to this piece that I'm not going to use this title anymore? And it's also interesting to me, here's a fun fact for you. Obviously, George R. R. Martin is taking inspiration for this, specifically from the English claim. We've been talking about the 100 Years' War. We've been talking about the English claim to the throne of France. And so starting with Edward III, the English kings start using the title King of France as part of their official title. Do you know when they stopped using the title King of France as part of their official title?
I do not, but please tell us.
1800! 1800 is when they stopped using the title King of France. Yes, during the American Revolution, George III was technically King of France by his title. This was something that, by the way, while there were multiple marriages between the English and French royal families, this was still a title that was being held on to by the English turned British monarchy. So, which obviously, it's not just them. Plenty of monarchies throughout the world hold on to these sorts of titles. But it is interesting to me if this is something that Baelor would have tried to drop, and if this is something that obviously would have been taken up again by his successors, but if that would have been part of these negotiations.
It's one of the better ways to illustrate how people cling to power, even when it's not power. It's just literally just an empty title. They're like, yeah, we're claiming dominion over people who clearly are not ruled by us, but I'm going to keep saying it anyway because it sounds tough. At a certain point, it doesn't sound tough. It sounds kind of weak, really. But anyway... If we back up to what people were thinking when the walk began, and there's a certain number of people that would have thought, there's no way this is going to work. There's no way it's going to get all the way there. He won't survive. He'll give up. He'll decide he's going to ride a carriage the rest of the way or take a ship. That group of people was slowly disabused of that notion. Then there would have come the shock of, not only did he make the walk, but he actually successfully arranged a betrothal with the Prince of Dorne and the Iron Throne, which is wild and very unexpected, perhaps. I'm not sure that they saw that coming when he left. He said, I'm going to go return the hostages. Did he also say, yeah, and I'm also going to arrange a marriage? I don't know that he announced that or made anyone aware of that. And even if he did, they might not have expected it to happen. But it did happen. So all of a sudden, you have this guy that's not only doing things a lot differently, is working. It's successful, and this is going to engender a wide variety of reactions, because for one thing, there's going to be some people who are, again, impressed. Other people who are going to be like, maybe impressed, but they don't want this. They don't want these results. They're like, wow, it's impressive that he did that, but I don't like it. So let's talk about that a little bit.
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, it's so hard, I think, for so many of Baelor's subjects to not see the war in Dorne in very personal terms. You know, we talk about it as Daeron's War of Conquest, and it very much is, but this is a huge war. This is a war where tens of thousands of Westerosi are fighting. So I think there's, in a real way, there's probably not a lot of households in Westeros that don't have a son or a brother or a husband or a lover or whoever it might be who's fighting in this war. And a lot of them are dying. A lot of them are not coming back. And so it's hard for them to not see this war in very personal terms, and to think that as this isn't just the Iron Throne's war to conquer Dorne, which is, you know, obviously its own motivation. This is also a personal war. This is something that we are personally motivated in. The king on the Iron Throne told us to march with him, and we did, and we fought with him, and we did conquer Dorne, albeit not very, very long. And now the king on the Iron Throne is all of a sudden saying, oh, no, you were wrong to do that, and actually I'm going to completely reverse course, and I'm not going to acknowledge you at all. It had to have been shocking to them. They're thinking, wait a second, what did we fight and die for? What did we fight and bleed for? Why did we follow your brother only to be told by you today, well, actually, you were wrong to do that. You shouldn't have done it. And I'm just going to completely do everything the opposite. It's this violent shift from, war at all costs to peace at all costs, and sort of leaves his subjects a little bit in the lurch.
Right. And I suspect some of them also would have thought that it wouldn't work. Like, oh, they're just agreeing to this to bide their time, just like they pretended to agree to want to negotiate with your brother. They're just waiting for an opportunity to turn this around on us somehow. They don't necessarily know exactly what advantage the Dornish could get from this, but it's what the Dornish do. They're tricky, they're poisoners, they're ambushers, you can't trust them, basically. That's the attitude of a lot of people. And yeah, like you said, it would be offensive that so many people fought and died only for this to be the end result, which looks like a capitulation in a lot of ways. Yeah, he handed the hostages back. He walked. He's prostrated himself to the Dornish. It will be what a lot of people would have seen here, and they would fail to see the strength of this commitment. Or they would denigrate it, perhaps. But that's what a lot of us see here, and I think that's fascinating that someone's strength can be perceived as such an extreme weakness. No one has such extreme mirrors as this character. The reflections and the images are so different. I think that's fascinating about him. So it's his struggle. He's struggling to overcome a lot of just entrenched Westerosi values, isn't he? There's revenge and blood feuds and just... It's normal to hate the Dornish. There's a lot of different things he's up against here that have really never been done. It's not one reform. It's a bunch of reforms at once. And that made a lot of people kind of hate him, didn't it?
Well, it did. And I think that, to your point, Westeros is a martial aristocracy. So it's expected in Westeros that your leaders are martial leaders. They are leaders on the battlefield. If your leader is not that, and in fact he's saying, actually, I believe this war was wrong, and I am going to completely reverse course, that is going to be shocking and offensive. And as you point out, and it has to be acknowledged, there is a lot of racial, xenophobic, cultural hatred toward the Dornish in parts of Westeros and throughout Westeros. So yeah, a king on the Iron Throne who says, actually, I am not only going to make peace with Dorne, I'm also going to completely give up on conquering Dorne, and I'm going to marry a member of the Dornish princely family into our family, also would have been shocking. And so, I look to the absolutely late great Stephen Atwell, had a wonderful, wonderful essay series called The Blacks and the Reds. And in the first essay series, he really talks about the origins of the first Blackfire Rebellion. Where are this coming from? And what he says, and I very much agree with him, is the origins of Daemon Blackfire and where this first Blackfire Rebellion is coming from, in no small part, is in Baelor, is in this reaction of Westerosi to Baelor, and to say, this is not the values that we as traditional Westerosi believe the king on the Iron Throne should have. We believe the king should be martial. We believe the king should be conquering. We believe the king should be anti-Dorne. And we don't like that what you're doing this. And this is setting up those seeds that are going to Germany and are going to eventually erupt into the first Blackfire Rebellion.
Right on, they sure will. And during the Blackfire Rebellions, one of the famous figures of that era will be a man named Baelor Breakspear, named for this same Baelor that we're talking about. And of course, he's the son of the very same Daeron that Baelor had as his sort of spiritual successor, if not his eventual full successor that he planned for, which that plan didn't come quite to fore the way he may have wanted to, but Daeron was eventually the king. Now, as dangerous and as odd as the walk may have been, the long walk home was in some ways more dangerous and more anxious because, well, he had to get home, and now there was an agreement in the balance. He hadn't actually forged a peace. People who were cynical or who thought maybe this wouldn't work, they may have just bided their time and waited and said, well, this is never going to happen. But once an actual betrothal and terms of an agreement were hammered out, now all of a sudden there's something more worth destroying. There's more at stake here. And there's no longer hostages walking with Baelor. So before the full story could spread everywhere, I mean, even before news got probably to the farthest corners of the realm, Baelor had to get home, and you might have expected him to take ship, but that is not what we're told. Quote,
After a sojourn in the old palace of Sunspear, the Prince of Dorne offered Baelor a galley to take him back to King's Landing. However, the young king insisted that the Seven had commanded him to walk. Some in the Dornish court feared that Prince Viserys would take it as a new cause for war when, not if, Baelor died upon the road, so the prince made every effort to make certain that the Dornish lords along the route would be hospitable.
Rescuing Aemon was a chief priority for him as well, and he did already say at the time that he'd be back for that. But I wonder, and Nina, what do you think? Do you think he would have walked anyway, even without Aemon? You think it would have just been like, yeah, this is the full thing. I got to walk back.
No, absolutely. I think absolutely he would have walked back. I think that this is something that Baelor saw as an atonement for his brother, an atonement for the war, an atonement for the sins of his realm, of House Targaryen, as however he saw it. So you don't get to say when your atonement is finished, like, oh, I walked there, now I get to take the easy way back. I think for him it was, no, I'm going to keep atoning. I am going to keep humbling myself so that my realm sees I am serious about this.
And it creates one of the more famous examples of this concept, which is that, yeah, the Kingsguard are supposed to defend the king, but here's a time where the king defends the Kingsguard, and then in turn, the Kingsguard defends the king almost immediately after his own rescue. It's, of course, the famous Aemon and Baelor and the Viper Pit incident, which we have the quote for right here.
He had asked the Dornish prince to explicitly command the Dragon Knight's release, and this Lord Will accepted. Yet, instead of freeing Aemon himself, he gave Baelor the key to Aemon's cage and an invitation to use it. But now, not only was Aemon naked in a cage, exposed to the hot sun by day and the cold wind by night, but also a pit had been dug beneath the cage, and within it were many vipers. The Dragon Knight is said to have begged for the king to leave him, to go and seek aid in the Dornish marches instead, but Baelor is said to have smiled and told him that the gods would protect him. Then he stepped into the pit.
So yeah, I guess we did have one other example of what was in those terms. We had this command for Aemon to be released. But of course, Lord Will came up with the loophole, and I guess it was to be expected. This is the Wills after all. We've already talked about them. They're extreme in their own ways. They're perhaps they're a candidate for the most violent house in Dorne. I think they're up there, you know. The Ullers and a few others would give them a run for their money. But just the fact that they're in the running it's already something. They were already notable in their time during the original conquest. Remember, this is the house that chopped the hand off of Orys Baratheon and many of his knights after agreeing to ransom them. So this was their loophole from that time, and here they are with another loophole. So yeah, no one was surprised, were they?
No, absolutely. And I think what is really notable here is that just as much as, you know, we just talked about how there may have been some or even many of Baelor's subjects who are saying, no, we don't want this, no, we will continue the war in Dorne, no, we are anti-Dornish. You're also seeing in Dorne that there is, I don't want to extend the Will's opinion to every bannerman within Dorne, but there are certainly families who do not want peace. They want war. I mean, this is provocative, what they're doing. They are saying, we don't care if a member of the Targaryen royal family dies. We don't care if the king dies. We don't care what that happens because it will mean more war. We are welcoming more war. The fact that they have to be commanded by their own liege lord to do this is showing just how much of, again, I think there's a real point of comparison here. You've got the king on the Iron Throne who's, advocating for peace when many of his subjects are probably wanting war. I think you've also got the Prince of Dorne and Sunspear who's advocating for peace. And we see at least one of his subjects who is saying, I don't buy it. I want more war. I want to continue this war against the Targaryens. And
from their perspective, the Wills came out ahead, even in the era of the dragons. So what are they worried about here? They don't care if this is a man of peace. They're not looking forward to that. Like you said, they prefer the status quo, and the status quo did them pretty well. The will of Will that cut off all those hands for Orys Baratheon, he wasn't punished. His son, yeah, the Baratheons got him back, but for the most part, that didn't bother them too much on the grand scale of things. Either way, back to Baelor and Aemon, here's what happened next. Quote,
Later, the singers claimed that the vipers bowed their heads to Baelor as he passed, but the truth is otherwise. Baelor was bitten 6 times while crossing to the cage, and though he opened it, he nearly collapsed before the Dragon Knight was able to thrust open the door and pull his cousin from the pit. The Wills are said to have laid wagers as Prince Aemon struggled to climb out of the cage with Baelor flung across his back, and perhaps it was their cruelty that spurred him to climb to the top of the cage and leap to safety.
This, of course, is a story that has been reinterpreted a number of ways. It is a classic example, maybe the example from Baelor's life of his piety, of how the gods were looking out for him, and similar such beliefs and stories that include people like Sansa having shared this idea and mused over it and basically believed it at the time. I don't know if she still would as someone who's grown a little older and wiser. But the point stands that it's inspired people of all ages, and it's a story that has lingered throughout Westeros. What do you think here? What's the idea behind the way this story is interpreted, the way George tells it, and the way that people think about it even in modern times?
I mean, I think what is the major takeaway from this story is this is Baelor thinking, I've got the protection of the gods. If I had any iota of doubt in my mind that I was doing the right thing, that I'm acting in the name of the Seven, well, that's gone now, because clearly the gods would not have allowed me to survive multiple viper bites and to rescue my cousin if they did not condone what I was doing. So this is, I think it does get referred to in the main story as a miracle, and it's understandable to see why. That line between Baelor the King and Baelor the de facto saint becomes very, very thin here, because now you've got a Baelor who is not just acting as a king, trying to rescue his cousin, trying to maintain this peace, trying to get home, but now he looks like heaven itself is on his side. The universe itself is on his side, trying to make sure he survives, trying to make sure he gets back so that he can continue to rule as king.
A few minutes ago, we discussed the reaction of the nobles to this piece. Let's discuss the reaction of the commons, too. A lot of people would see it differently, depending on where they lived, I suppose. You know, if you're living in the marches, you might still be a home team kind of guy and be against peace with the Dornish and vice versa. But what about people like in the far north and places like the Iron Islands? I wonder, we can only just guess what they would have thought of a man like this or someone in the Vale. The Vale is an interesting example because they actually worship the Seven, unlike the North and the Iron Isles. But the Vale would be among the most remote places from Dorne where all this was happening, where they actually worship the Seven. So I don't know. It's just kind of an idle question that I wonder how people around the realm saw it. Given how popular he is in the modern times, I suspect it was somewhat similar, if not even more charged back then.
Well, I'm also extremely curious about the reaction of the North, because it's in Daeron's word that Rickon Stark dies, and that is the kickoff to Stark succession crises that continue for several generations. And so, I can imagine that you've got this possibly very beloved heir of the North, the oldest son of Cregan and his, beloved first wife, who's all of a sudden dying in this war. That's going to give very charged reactions when Baelor is reacting in the very opposite way to that.
And just the idea of the legend of a man who believed in himself and the gods so much, and his piety was such that he survived the poison. Maybe not what really happened, but that is what people seem to believe. That is the accepted story for most people, or the story that gets used. And again, this is a man that, despite his piety and his humility, he managed to get everyone's attention really quite well and managed to have the spotlight on him, despite that odd combination of humility, not usually what you would expect. A really humble guy that we all pay attention to all the time. Put the spotlight on that guy. He's really humble. So it did have a big impact on him in reality. He really did almost die from what we're told, and that's believable. But are we really to believe that it permanently altered his mental state? Or maybe he was already like that? Or maybe it's a little of both? What do you think?
I mean, on the one hand, I'm not really inclined to see that it changed him, because what we see of Baelor from the moment he becomes king and even before that to this moment, he's already showing, I am extremely committed to peace. I am extremely committed to the faith of the Seven, and I will stop at nothing to pursue both of those end goals. And so I don't think that this poisoning really changes him. I don't see him acting differently for the rest of his reign, other than maybe even more so than we could have imagined. But again, I think what this episode does is that it really convinces Baelor that he's got the gods on his side. That nothing of what he does can ever go against the will of the Seven. Because if the Seven will save him from what should have been almost certain death in this viper pit, then surely what they mean him to do is to go on ruling, to rule in their name, to do what he believes is their will. And I think that Baelor thinks nothing can stop him. He is literally blessed by the gods to rule.
Yeah, he set out with a confidence of that sort and returned with even more of it because it played out the way he expected. He accomplished this very difficult thing that must have seemed like a long shot to actually accomplish, and he did it. So yes, that would have absolutely confirmed, like you're saying, that that the gods were on his side.
Return to King's Landing.
Now, he gets back to King's Landing eventually after being laid up, being sick for a while, recovering from the poison. But which must have again been a bit of anxiety at the Red Keep. Well, maybe he's not going to survive this. The poison might get him. But at a certain point, it must have been safe to breathe a sigh of relief and say, okay, it looks like he's going to make it. Now, interestingly, he gets back to the King's Landing, and I'm not sure he ever leaves again. I can't, there's no indication that he ever walked away again. He certainly didn't take a long walk to the north, that's for sure. But yeah, it's almost, I think it's from this point on, it's like he did all his traveling at once. He's like, yeah, I walked all the way to Dorne and back. I'm done walking. I'll just stay here for the rest of my life. Now, had he lived a long, full life, maybe that would have changed, but of course it didn't. Now that he was back at the Red Keep, he could do some of those things that kings normally do right away. Establishing his reign, maybe appointing counselors. There's probably some Kingsguard that needed replacing. A lot of these things aren't told to us, but these are things that would have been happening, would have been needed. One of the most important symbols of rule, of course, is the crown. The crown it really stands out for Targaryens because, well, the Iron Throne, that's just going to look the way it looks. They can't keep changing that. But the crown, they can, some of them wear a crown of their ancestors. Some of them make a new crown. Baelor wasn't going to pass up the opportunity to make a statement with his crown. Right, Nina?
No, absolutely. And as an aside, I absolutely love talking about Targaryen crowns. I could talk about this for another 5 hours, but I will limit myself here. I think what is very unique about Baelor is that alone among the Targaryens, he does not wear any kind of precious metal, any kind of jewels, any really permanent crown at all. His crown is a crown of vines and flowers. At least that's the way it's depicted in Amok's portrait. Whether he wore that all the time, or whether that was just once, or whether that was just an imagined, image of him, we don't know for certain. But it's something that I think Baelor certainly wanted his image to be. And I think that this is Baelor saying, gold does no good if it's sitting on my head. It doesn't help anyone if I'm wearing gold. Gold should be in the hands of my people. Gold should be doing good for my people. If the Seven have given us beauty in nature, in the sense of vines and flowers, then why don't we make our crowns out of that? Those are freely given by the Seven, and those are just as good as gold and gems. We can use the gold and gems for the good of the people. We'll decorate ourselves with what the Seven give us. And in that sense, I think our best point of comparison, and I'll probably come back to this more than once, for Baelor is the High Sparrow. Is the High Sparrow in A Feast for Crows. What do we see when Cersei first encounters the High Sparrow? He's quite literally scrubbing the floors. He's in very simple clothing. And Cersei brings up specifically, she says, wait a second, where's your crown? My father bought you a nice new crown after the old one was destroyed. It's a nice new crystal crown. Why aren't you wearing it? And he says, yes, that was very nice of Tywin to do that, and we'll keep him in our prayers because of that. But that crown was not doing us any good. We sold it. We sold it along with our cloth of gold and our cloth of silver vestments because that gold belongs in the hands of the people. And what does he say specifically? Wool is just as good for us. That's why the gods gave us sheep. I think Baelor would have given exactly the same answer if someone had asked him, why aren't you wearing a crown of gold? He would have said, vines and flowers will do just as well to decorate us. That's why the seven would give them to us.
We talked about how Daeron was maybe Baelor's idea as his heir. Now, what I'm also pretty sure of, and I think Nina agrees, is that the rest of the Targaryens weren't fully aware of his line of thinking here. Because they would have still expected that his line continue through him. He was married to his sister. There would have been expectation that he's going to have children and that the line continues through their sons or son or whoever. But not through this Daeron that he just married off to the Princess of Dorne, or betrothed to. So they would have been like, okay, so the Prince of Dorne was maybe in on it being a major marriage, but the Red Keep wasn't. And so when Baelor gets back, one of the first things he does after the crowning is to dissolve his marriage, which instantly ends the idea that he's going to have children of his own. Well, maybe they think, oh, maybe he's going to marry somebody else so he can still have children. But of course, no, that's not the case either. This man is not only not going to have children with his sister, he doesn't want to have children with anyone. That just throws the whole idea of the succession and the dynasty in a direction they never would have seen coming. And just the idea of dissolving the marriage in the first place is by itself kind of unprecedented for Westeros. I mean, this isn't normal, is it?
No, it's not. And we're told time and again, it's not an easy thing to dissolve marriages in Westeros. Now, for Baelor, he does have the one very easy excuse that we always hear, which is non-consummation. And I think what we do hear from Yandel in The World of Ice and Fire is that is the excuse that Baelor uses, that this marriage was not consummated. He also points out that it was made before he became king, which is sort of an interesting argument because I would say most aristocratic marriages in Westeros are probably made, or I should, maybe not most, but certainly probably some of them are made while the parties are still minors or children. So not sure how much that argument ever would fly, but non-consummation, definitely a reason that is used in Westeros to annul marriages. And I think it's notable that Baelor doesn't say the marriage is invalid because it's incestuous. And this was something that we brought up in the first part when we're talking about Baelor's religiosity. And I still very much believe Baelor saw Targaryen incest as sinful, as wrong. But I think Baelor might have felt that on a practical level, he was in a bit of a bind here because he knows he's just made this arrangement between himself and the Prince of Dorne to betroth Mariah and Daeron. If he now says incestuous marriages are inherently unlawful, he's automatically said the marriage of Aegon and Daenerys is unlawful, and therefore Daeron is a bastard with no rights of inheritance. And that's not really going to fly with the Prince of Dorne, who he just betrothed Mariah to. It's going to feel like he kind of just sold him, an empty promise. So I think Baelor might have thought on a practical level, even though Baelor, may personally believe that incestuous marriages are sinful and wrong, I'm just going to keep my marriage, the reason for my marriage's dissolution, as non-consummation so that I don't invalidate Daeron's legitimacy.
Yeah, it's really clever. And again, this points to Baelor actually having a strong sense of the politics behind these things. Maybe he loses this later in life, again, in his very short life. But these decisions seem pretty well calculated because, yes, he couldn't expect that to be allowed to go through that way. They wouldn't have agreed to that, and it would have thrown the whole peace deal out the window. He would have been conning the Dornish. In a way, as I said, though, he was kind of conning his own people, but he served it to them in a way that they could probably accept. Because what was Viserys getting? The hand of the king, the guy that he probably expected to be making a lot of these decisions? He's basically being told that, okay, yeah, your grandson is going to be next. So maybe just be... That's not what actually happens, but that was what he's being fed sort of between the lines here, and he'd probably be okay with that, all things considered. Like, yeah, if you're gonna skip over my unworthy son, I don't mind that too much either. But unfortunately, Aegon the Unworthy did have a reign, but we're well before that. Back to Baelor. So taking on these burdens, shall we say, and setting an example is respectable, right? It's extreme, but you can respect a lot of what he's doing. You can say, wow, this guy is really, I don't know if I can see the end result of all these, but it sure is brave and difficult to go through life without a wife or without having a family when, you know, you're a prince and you can have anyone you want, etc. This commitment that he's showing, people that might have been cynical might have been starting to be won over by this barrage of evidence that he's legitimately the man that he seems to be. But when it comes to the female side of his family, it's a very different look because he's not respecting them. He's not respecting women consistently here. We see what happens with Mariah, how she might have felt like she was being set aside. And that's just a microcosm of what's going on with his own family. Because he sets aside Dana. Well, that's one thing, to divorce her. But he didn't just divorce her. He put her in a prison, basically. Let's talk about the so-called Maiden Vault, which wasn't just a place for his sisters. It ended up containing a whole lot of different women of nobility and royalty, didn't it?
No, it absolutely did. And I think that this is the beginning of Baelor really, I think, seeing himself as personally responsible for the spiritual welfare of his people. And I think Baelor very much believed that his subjects, and especially his sisters, could not be trusted to look after their own spiritual welfare. And so it was his job, personally, to make sure that they were kept spiritually healthy, so to speak. And so they couldn't be trusted to be out in the world to what he considers tempt men into sin. The only safe option for everyone involved, in Baelor's mind, is to, as you say, literally imprison them, to keep them in what is called this quote-unquote court of beauty for the rest of their lives, so that no one can ever affect their spiritual fortitude. I do want to point out here as well, and I'm curious about it to see if this will come up later. You know, we talk about the shadow of the dance always hanging over Baelor, and I do think that always needs to be emphasized. I wonder to what extent Baelor sees himself as sort of this spiritual father of House Targaryen, someone who's looking after the rest of House Targaryen on a moral level. Is he thinking about his grandmother Rhaenyra? You know, Rhaenyra is infamous in Westerosi history. She's always remembered for having this extramarital affair with Harwin Strong. And he may have also been thinking of his possible namesake, his Aunt Baela, who was herself boasting of having all of these partners before her marriage to Alan Valerian. And is he also thinking of, for example, Jaehaerys' daughters, Sarah and Visera, who are also, you know, very infamous in Westerosi history? I think there's a way in which Baelor is thinking about all of these ancestors and indirect ancestors of his and thinking, no. Clearly, the women of House Targaryen cannot be trusted to look after their own spiritual welfare. And since I've already been blessed by the gods, it's my job to make sure that they're kept in line, so to speak. It's my job to make sure that they're kept spiritually healthy. And the only way that I can do that is to quite literally put them under lock and key so that everyone involved is safe.
Yeah, it really gets to the extremes of him seeing himself as a vessel of the gods. If he feels good about it, it's right. If he feels bad about it, or it makes him feel a way that's impure or wrong, then that element is evil or dangerous. It's a kind of selfish, but that's what happens when you live by these extremes. So he sees himself as sort of a weather vane of the gods themselves, and that's where it gets kind of messy in spots like this.
Well, and I was going to add as well, and this is so characteristic of Baelor, what happens here is that he is always thinking of what is right by the gods. What do the gods want me to do? And the practical consequences of that do not matter to Baelor. It does not matter whatever the practical consequences. So as with here, Baelor is putting his sisters under effectively lock and key for the rest of their lives. What that means is that he is losing 3 very eligible marriage partners, very eligible dynastic pawns to be used to broker agreements with maybe, for example, those subjects who are not particularly happy with Baelor's peace program. Baelor doesn't really care that he's losing them, though, because to Baelor, it's not a loss. He's saying, well, as long as I'm looking after their spiritual welfare, practical consequences of that don't really matter.
Yeah, practicality is a little farther down on his list. Like you said, like we said earlier, and made the point in the first episode about Baelor that yes, peace was important to him, but it actually wasn't number one. Piety was above that. Peace was maybe to him a subset of piety, but piety was first. Faith was first. That always comes first, and it has these sort of odd and unfortunate consequences. My focus has been greatly enhanced by using Rise productivity software. I tend to have a mind that wanders a lot, and I'm clicking on other tabs, looking at stuff that's maybe not exactly what I should be focusing on. But Rise is really good about reminding me what I'm supposed to be focusing on or what I've set out to focus on, and that's really helpful. Also, it's just good for tracking how much work I've gotten done in a day, which can be satisfying to manage, and it's nice to be able to look back on your day and have a sense of what you've actually accomplished or haven't accomplished, if that is the case.
I like Rise because I feel that it's catered towards a more personal approach.
Yeah.
Rather than being accountable to a boss, you're accountable to yourself.
Exactly. Click the link in the description and use the code Westeros3 to get 25% off your first 3 months of a subscription. Join us as a supporter at patreon.com/History of Westeros to get things like bonus episodes, access to scripts, shoutouts, and more. From the depths of Fleabottom, Lord Ken of House Hammer has declared for Queen Curry, Fire of the North, who recovered Dark Sister from beyond the wall. Peter Blaze of the Emerald Isle, captain of the Werewood Wanderers, to long lives, quick deaths, cold beer, and warm women. Daegron, Marshal of the Axe, captain of the Red Tide, resistance is futile. Kyron Callsbane, captain of the Stone Shields, the torrent breaks upon the stone. Haema Helminth, captain of the Whispering Children, dead men tell no secrets. Shepard, the shepherd of Essos, all men are sheep before the shepherd, heir to the Whispering Children. Lady Lajara Dajo, the Iron Lily, master archer, castellan of the Summer Island Keep Arboreal Point, and captain of the all-female Wailing Widows, women and children first. Lord Brandon Brewer of Castle Blackroon, captain of the Shadow Wolves, our steel is cold, our vengeance colder. Black Alex Sand, the Bastard of Spears, leader of the Bermuda Vanguard. Vorian of House Betterfetter, captain of the Golden Fetters. We face our oppression with style. Aegon the Underestimated, captain of the Clanking Dragons. Our clank is clank as clank. Lady Sarah Connolly the Willful. Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure. Jenny's patron. Maester Malachi, forgotten dragon seed from the Isle of Driftmark, now in service to House Harlaw. And Stives the White, captain of the Hopeful Patriots, a band of exile knights. The world ends when hope dies.
Policies.
He tried to ban prostitution, which if you think about how that was framed in the time of A Song of Ice and Fire, the idea was treated as a joke. Like Stannis entertained the idea, and people like Littlefinger and Tyrion and others just thought, it'll never work. I mean, people are still going to do this, even if you ban it and make it outlawed. So it's one of those things where banning something, the act of doing it, creates a problem perhaps larger than having the problem in the first place, because it's so hard to ban something so ubiquitous to society that's been so part of it for so long. So let's talk about that a little bit. What do you think?
Well, and especially, it's not just the banning. It's not just banning it itself. It's also what is practically speaking happening to these 1,000 women and children that Baelor is driving out of King's Landing. Presumably, for many, if not most or all of them, this is the only home they've ever known. Certainly for the children who are involved. They don't know any other home. They don't know any other life. So now you are driving them out of this home. They have nowhere to go. There is no roadmap for them. As far as we know, he's not giving them any resources. There's not a place for them to go. They are just being let out into effectively the wild to fend for themselves. And these are probably largely, if not entirely, women, and certainly for the children, who do not have skill sets that they can turn into other professions. They do not have, probably not a lot of them have families that they can go back to. Where are they going? Who is going to take care of them? What are they going to do? How are they going to take care of these children? Baelor is not concerned with any of that. The only thing he is concerned with is making sure that they are out of what I think he probably considers his pure city. And all well and good for Baelor, but what happens to these people? We look at, for example, think of so many times where there are refugees throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. Think of all the people who have fled to White Harbor and are huddling there. Think of all the people who are coming to Meereen. Those are hard problems, and they're not easy solutions to deal with. Baelor doesn't care. Baelor does not care whose problem it is that these women and children are now out there, as long as they are gone from where he is.
Yeah, it's really not kingly at all. I mean, he's sending them elsewhere in his realm, yet he has no concern for what happens to them or what happens to the people that have to interact with them, who take them in or who take pity on them and give them food or whatever. Wherever that burden lands, yeah, he's not concerned with it, which is very much at odds with this notion of him as someone who cares deeply about what happens to his subjects or has a lot of compassion. I'm not sure he has that level of compassion. I'm not sure that's the right word. Like Nina said, it is more of a concern with their spiritual health, which is a much more paternalistic idea than true compassion. And that's why we refer to this man as an extreme. I'm not sure that he had compassion. There's too many people he treated very roughly, both with his policies and in his personal life. And we've just seen both of those examples all at once with the treatment of both his sisters and with these people that are society-wise far beneath him, and to him, the lowest of the low. People who sell their bodies for coin would be, what he thinks of it. And it goes farther than this. His extremes go to education as well. Now, we, of course, value education very much. I say, Valar, read us all the time. I'm not just talking about A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, reading is great. We're all pro-reading here. This is a book podcast about a book topic, after all. So
reading is great. History of Westeros 2024.
Yes, really pushing a radical agenda here. But it is, of course, even now in the real world, it's a discussed topic. People aren't out here doing a lot of book burnings, but they are, book bannings are still a thing in the modern world. And in some places, more dangerous ideas are thrown around. But yeah, here in Westeros, Baelor burned books. This is something I want to explore a little more fully in another side topic at a different episode, because there's so many books we could think about, specific books that he might have targeted, and wondering about the efforts to save them, like keeping Baelor from finding out and, not letting him know what was actually happening and things like that. That's too much for this episode. I think we have so much just by talking about Baelor himself. But from a high level view, Nina, talk about what you think drove him to do this and maybe specific things that he was trying to accomplish with this. It seems like a very heavy-handed thing to do, yet simultaneously very Targaryen. Burn it all, right? It's got a bit of Aerys even to it, long before Aerys was born.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that, again, and I'll say this probably 10 more times talking about Baelor, I very much believe that Baelor saw himself as personally responsible for the spiritual welfare of his realm. If Baelor believes the Seven have appointed me as their agent, then it's my job to make sure that I'm not distributing heretical, impious, incorrect information to my subjects, because then I'm leading them down what Baelor considers the path of sin. I'm leading them down spiritual degradation. And so I think that Baelor is looking to make sure I'm not exposing my subjects to any sort of information that will lead them down this path. And so when you get to a book like, for example, The Testimony of Mushroom, it's extremely explicit. It's got a lot of very racy, we'll say it, very sexy details about the very recent past. That's not something that Baelor wants to expose people to. He doesn't want people reading that sort of information, because that's, again, conflict with how he sees this morally pure realm. Or when it comes to something like Septon Barth's Unnatural History, I think Baelor was probably very specifically offended by Septon Barth, because here he's thinking, all right, you've got someone like Mushroom. Well, all right, he's just spouting information I don't want. All right, whatever. But now you've got a Septon who's spreading these ideas that I think Baelor considered probably very heretical, very controversial. I think he was probably very offended by that. The idea that, oh, well, I don't want my subjects thinking that if a Septon says it, then it's okay. I want to show that no, even a Septon could potentially lead you into heresy. Nothing is sacred except what is sacred to the gods. And so I'm not going to let you all be exposed to what I think is heretical information. I'm going to take that away from you so that, like I did with my sisters imprisoning them, you're not tempted by that. You're not potentially led down the path of sin.
So if we were to categorize what we suspect were the types of books he most targeted, it would be those that are sexual in nature and supernatural in nature. Like, those are the two biggest categories. So, and of course, the fact that we have copies of these books in modern times proves that he didn't get his hands on all of them, or his subjects didn't. And that may also extend to his maybe lack of vision outside what's going on in his capital. He may have wanted those books burned everywhere, but just the evidence of them being burned in the Red Keep and at King's Landing might have been enough for him to kind of ignore the fact that they might have still existed elsewhere. As long as he doesn't know about it, maybe it's not going to bother him too much, that kind of thing. Not really sure on that, but I think that's probably got to be part of it. But again, I want to repeat myself a little bit, or at least re-emphasize how this would have been such an interesting time in Westeros. The idea of maesters maybe squirreling some copies of certain books away and keeping the Septon. Like in Old Town, you got the Septons who were intent on following Baelor's orders. Maybe a few who didn't quite want to go that far. And the Archmaesters who were probably amongst those most horrified by this command and most likely to disobey it in secret. I don't suppose a whole lot of people were disobeying it openly because it's still the king, and that can get you burned potentially.
Well, I'm also curious to what extent you get places like, especially in the north, where the rule of the seven is obviously a lot less common, not completely unknown, but definitely a lot less common. Are there more repositories of these kinds of books, specifically because they wouldn't have been as, and especially what we'll get to at the end of Baelor's reign, definitely not particularly inclined to see Baelor as someone who they're really looking to follow in a very strict letter of the law?
Yeah, like, for example, I doubt the library at the Wall was picked through very thoroughly. I mean, you've seen Sam try to pick that book. That place is overwhelming. They don't have the manpower to look for every copy of A Caution for Young Girls in there. And I don't know if they were heavily motivated to do so. But maybe, who knows, maybe there were a few Septons that wound up on the Wall and decided to spend their time doing exactly what Baelor wanted, which was just a lot of time in the library looking for the occasional book to burn. What a life. That sounds terrible. Now, again, I want to remind of what I said a minute ago about this being a kind of a Targaryen thing to do in a kind of ironic way, to burn things. There were other elements of Baelor that are surprisingly Targaryen, despite how un-Targaryen he was in so many ways. I think this is maybe a bit of a misconception to think of this man as not Targaryen, because in many ways he was very Targaryen, just very different flavor of Targaryen. He tried to hatch dragon eggs just like the rest. He just, like so many other things, he did it differently. We don't hear about any flames being used, any superheated material, certainly no wildfire, certainly no sorcery, definitely no blood magic, but prayer, right? We're told this is what he did. No surprise it didn't work, but is this a sign of burgeoning madness, or is just kind of not that crazy compared to some of these other things?
Well, I mean, when we're talking about any attempts to hatch dragons between the death of the last dragon in 153 and Dany's successful attempts, I think all of them are obviously all failures. No one quite knows what to do. No one's stumbled upon that secret recipe. Dany eventually does it almost by instinct and accident. But I think for Baelor, his motivation here is really, I think, to say, let's start over from square one. Clearly the gods weren't happy with Valyria. They wanted to punish Valyria, and rightly so, according to Baelor, because Valyria is this cesspit of sin and incest. So let's not start where the Valyrians did with hatching dragons with sorcery. Clearly the gods weren't into that. But maybe if we start from square one with prayer. If we get the gods involved in what I'll call, for lack of a better term, square one, if we get the gods involved on the ground level and say, we are invoking the seven to help us with the hatching of dragons. We are using the dragons to do the will of the seven, not to attack seven worshippers, but to promote the worship of the seven. I think Baelor genuinely believed the seven would smile upon this, would say, yes, we will give you the dragons as a tool to use to continue your work in our name. Obviously, it didn't work, but I think that's what Baelor's idea was.
Yeah, and if it had happened, it, like everything else in his worldview, it would have been because it's what the gods wanted. And since it didn't, I wonder if he just said, okay, I guess this isn't what the gods want. Because I don't know that he kept doing it for the entirety of his reign. We hear about him doing it, but it's not necessarily something that's a constant, although that's not clear either. Maybe it was a constant. Maybe he was praying over his eggs a couple times a week until the end, but we're not given that expressly, so for now it's just an idea. But there's another possible angle here, which is the possibility that he was dreaming about it. He wouldn't have had a lot of prior examples to go on. Of course, there were lots of dreamers prior to him and his family, but those would have all been during the era of actual living dragons. So this is right at the beginning of the era of no dragon. So there hasn't been a Daron the Drunkard yet, or an Aryan, or let alone someone like an egg, or any of those characters who had varying types of quote-unquote dreams of dragons, which whether or not they were just really strong ideas or actual supernatural visions. Baelor would be someone that I feel pretty strongly that anything that's flashing in his mind of this nature, he's going to attribute to the gods. And thus it creates a conundrum for him where he's like, well, the gods got rid of dragons, but I'm still having dreams of them. And if everything of me is coming from the gods, then, yeah, it just gets to the heart of this dichotomy that is Baelor, where he's trying to separate the dragons from the faith, but also combine them. Like, these are two things that can't really be separated, yet they have nothing to do with each other. They never really did. They were, back in the day, the Andals and the Valyrians were almost completely the opposite. The Andal worldviews are almost polar opposite to Valyrian worldviews. Anti-slavery versus slavery, right? Protect the weak versus enslave the weak. That kind of thing. We went over this before. We don't need to go through every single example, but this is part of why these things are so in opposition to themselves within Baelor, and why he's such a conundrum, because his own belief systems conflict with each other very much. What do you think about the idea that of the concept of dreams for him in general? How would he interpret these things, especially if he's having actual dragon dreams?
I mean, it's, and I was thinking about this as you were saying it. I think it's worth keeping in mind for Baelor as well, that for Baelor, dragons are not some sort of distant memory. Dragons are not something that existed a really long time ago, and he's only heard stories about them. Baelor saw the last dragon, almost certainly. Baelor's father was a dragon rider. His grandparents were dragon riders. His uncle had a dragon egg. His aunt was both his aunts were dragon riders. This is not something where dragons are a faraway concept that Baelor is relying on dreams and visions to bring back. For Baelor, dragons are very, very real. They existed very recently. And so I don't know that he really thought it was something that was a faraway idea for him. I think for Baelor, again, it was something where the dragons were taken away because the Targaryens were impious and because the Valyrians were impious. And so Baelor, I will be the pious Targaryen. And so that's why dragons will come back for me if I invoke the gods.
Well said. I can only wonder at how he interpreted these things and what was actually seen, what kind of vision/dreams he actually had. But one thing's for sure, he was adding to his own dreams with his actions later in life, and perhaps earlier in life. But what I'm referring to is his penchant for fasting, which escalated throughout his life. And you definitely see things when you're going without sleep and food. So Whatever he was seeing while he was asleep may have started to happen while he was awake, too. He may have started having difficulties telling the two apart. Who knows? But it all escalated, shall we say. Now, if we return to the matter, the example you gave earlier about the High Sparrow, rather, selling his crown and feeding people, it's one of the things that most of us would probably say, hey, well, the High Sparrow's a dangerous, violent man, but I respect that decision, selling the crown to feed people. That's a plus. I'll put that one in the pro column. Baelor had a lot of that in him, as you hinted at or suggested. He wanted to take care of people in a certain ways. He wanted to not keep money for himself. He wasn't greedy, but he kind of had an inverse Euron sense of money, where money was means to an end, but you can make problems for yourself in the realm if you aren't careful with spending. I mean, you can overspend, you can screw up your own economy. Like, this isn't something you should be too careless with, but it seems like he kind of was.
A little bit. And I think that, we've been talking a lot, and justifiably, about the negative sides of Baelor's piety and devotion to the Seven. But I think, to your point, this is something that we can give Baelor, at least some extent, some credit on. Like, I really don't think that there is a Targaryen king, with maybe the possible exception of Aegon V, and even then I'm not sure, who is this committed to charity, who is this committed to saying, no, my welfare doesn't matter. My glory as king does not matter. My appearance, decking me out in gold, absolutely not. I am putting all of that in the hands of the people. That's huge, and I don't think we can overemphasize that enough. Westeros is such a deeply classist society. It is a society where, for so many aristocrats, the small folk aren't just lower, they are literally subhuman. And Baelor is saying, no, I am actually going to take all of the money that belongs to the royal government, and I am going to hand it to the people. That's huge, and it is something that I do think Baelor deserves some level of credit on. But, to your point, it's not so easy. And again, this comes back to the point of Baelor doing things, rightly or wrongly, and not really caring about the practical consequences. Baelor is emptying the royal treasury multiple times. Great. Except if I'm Prince Viserys and I'm Hand, I'm probably thinking, well, Your Grace, how are we going to run the government, though? How are you going to run your household? How are you going to pay the city watch? How are you going to pay everyone who works for the government? That money needs to be used for these things. It's all well and good to say, I'd like to put that in the hands of the people. Fantastic. How are you going to also run the country? Because there's more things that your money needs to be spent on than just putting it in the hands of the people. Putting it in the hands of the people, very important. Running the government, also an important thing. And I think that that's the sort of practical consequence that Baelor is not thinking about. I think he's probably telling Viserys, figure it out. Find the money somewhere. Manage the household. That's your job as Hand. I want this done. You're going to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, that's so much how I see it as well. He delegates this day-to-day earthly stuff and focuses on the spiritual and the pious. And in a lot of ways, like you said, there's a lot of good in that. It's certainly better than a lot of other things he could be doing that a lot of other Targaryen kings would have done, vastly better than what his brother did, right? Invading another country and causing a lot of death and suffering. Clearly vastly worse. Yet, we'll say his priorities are, like you said, they're not always where maybe they should be, because he has piety above all else. And that means rather than putting in, say, infrastructure to permanently alleviate some of these problems, he's more concerned with building a giant church, for example. He built the Great Sept. We have the Sept of Remembrance. That was built for Rhaenys after her death, but Maegor very demonstrably burned that down with a lot of faithful inside it at the time. Or we'll say, rather, Balerion did that, but Maegor, urged the opening of the mouth and the Dracarys and all that. Yeah. So there was still the Grand Sept during Aegon the first time. This was presumably the one we see in House of the Dragon, incidentally. And it was already atop Visenya's Hill, and apparently still is even now, because it was just eclipsed. They never tore it down. But Baelor wanted to build an even bigger one atop Visenya's Hill, and this was after a vision. So this kind of ties into what we were talking about before with dreams, though definitely there's nothing draconic about this one. Unless he's thinking about, replacing the one that was destroyed, which might be a little dragon in that. But mostly this feels like not supernatural, but still something he very much did as if it was a command from the gods, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think that Baelor very much believed that this was something that the gods wanted him to do, that they wanted him to build this sort of pure city, not only in terms of the people who are living in it, but also the infrastructure that's in it. That the holy city that is ruled by their holy king, well, it needs the holiest of all septs. It needs this grand, giant sept to be able to worship the gods within it. And I do think that, if we look at this to the two people that I think are most likely to be the historical inspirations for Baelor, which is Henry VI of England and Louis IX of France, you do also see with them these large, grandiose, and to some extent, certainly with Louis IX, religious building projects that become almost an obsession, certainly for Henry VI. Henry is very much interested, his Lancastrian side, his grandfather and his father are very much proponents of reading, scholarship. And so Henry grows up very concerned to make sure that he's fostering not only scholarship, but also this spiritual welfare. He wants to be able for people to learn Latin, for people to study the works of the church. He wants to be sure that they have this place to study. And so he dreams this very, very grand the establishments at Eton and King's College. And when I say grand, I mean grand. I mean, we're talking about 15 years after he starts building King's College. He has spent £16,000 on its construction and the construction of Eton. And when he's looking at the construction papers for Eton, he is literally personally making notes on these. This is the King of England who is looking over this project and saying, no, I have personal thoughts on how this gets constructed. So much so that he actually dreams of it being twice the size that it is today. It doesn't end up getting to that point, but he is dreaming so big. He wants this to be his legacy in stone. He wants this to be this grand vision that he has. And the same with Louis IX of France. Louis IX builds what is the Sainte-Chapelle. And this is basically Louis IX's contribution to this era of grand ecclesiastical projects. So this is the way that Louis can say, I am the spiritual successor to Charlemagne. I am building my own grand church so that I can step into the shoes of Charlemagne and show that I am now the most Christian king of France, the one who is chosen by God to rule. And of course, you can still see both of these today. Sainte-Chapelle is no longer a church, but you can see all of these today, and they really do reflect just how invested both of these kings were in these building projects.
Yeah, that's a great parallel. I'm sure Baelor was very involved in this project as well, and it was just down the street from him. He wouldn't have to go far to check it out. Yeah. Now, it wasn't finished during his lifetime, or what do we know about that? This is a little bit of a mystery, isn't it?
Well, it is, because it doesn't seem to be finished in his lifetime. It seems to be finished during round about the reign of Daron II. Although, again, we're not really given a final date as to when it's completed. And we don't have a really good idea as to what Baelor was intending for the sept. Obviously, for it to be a sept. But was he thinking of moving the faith here? It's a big enough question mark, and something that I'm very intrigued by to talk about, or to see if Blood and Fire or any future volumes talk about. It's also intriguing because we don't know, did Baelor intend to be buried here, or at least for his ashes to be interred here? I'm assuming that Baelor probably intended to be burned the way that most Targaryens are. But did he intend for his own ashes to be here? Did he intend to move the Targaryens from their crypt on Dragonstone to this new grandiose crypt? We don't know, and I'm very much intrigued to see who, if anyone, is actually in the Great Sept of Baelor versus still in the crypt on Dragonstone.
Yeah, because that really speaks to a change in intent, doesn't it? I mean, he built tombs down there for kings, which is a clear sign that they're no longer going to be buried on Dragonstone. Now, but as you say, it doesn't appear that many Targaryens actually took this route. They said, actually, Baelor, no, we're going to keep doing it the way we were. Had he reigned longer, he may have successfully been able to change tradition. But again, only 10-year reign. And that, of course, is very telling. 10 years is not enough to build a massive edifice like this in this sort of technological environment. So yeah, I doubt it was finished during his reign as well. I'm with you that it was probably finished during the reign of Daeron II. Someone who would have had an incentive to finish it, whereas it may have been paused during the reign of Aegon IV, who may not have been excited about funding that. He may have wanted that money spent somewhere else. So I my own theory is that it was work was paused for a while and then resumed under Daeron and finished under Daeron. Yeah, so an open question, as you say. Burials and things of that nature keep us in the realm of the afterlife and the basic idea of Baelor, which is that he's a very religious guy, a man who is concerned about the spiritual health of his subjects, as we keep saying. And of course, even though he's a bit of the spiritual leader himself in a lot of ways, there's still the position of High Septon. He didn't do away with that. He didn't name himself High Septon, although a lot of people considered him the Septon King. It wouldn't have been maybe that big of a surprise if he did, but he didn't. And so let's talk about how he handled that office, which you would expect to be a very important thing for him. Let's start off with this quote.
Even Aegon tread lightly where the faith was concerned. It was his son Maegor who broke their power. But even then, the faith came back under kings like Baelor the Blessed.
Now, of course, when it says come back, they were never gone, but he means that, waxing and waning, they were at a particular high point during Baelor's reign, and you can see why. He would have invested them with more power. They would have felt more comfortable wielding power and doing the sort of things that Septons do and expecting that Baelor would back them up. They may also expect that Septons that act out of line might be punished extra. This is something I hadn't really thought about very much. Was Baelor tough on the priests who didn't follow his lead, or was he lenient? We don't really have a lot of examples here. I could kind of see it either way. What do you think, Nina?
I am fascinated by this interaction between Baelor and the, for lack of a better term, clergy of the faith, and especially the office of High Septon, because I think this is very much evidence in my book to say that Baelor is far from a weak king. I think it is very easy to think of Baelor as someone who, to the point of that quote, is handing over power to the faith and just sort of letting the faith run the realm. I don't think that's actually what's happening here. I think that Baelor is making a very clear statement of where his power is vis-a-vis the power of the faith. And I think we see that in the nomination of the two High Septons. Obviously, this is not the first time that the Targaryens have gotten involved in the election of a High Septon, because we see this during the reign of Jaehaerys and Alysanne. Jaehaerys and Alysanne fly to Old Town, and they make it very clear they expect to see someone who supports the doctrine of exceptionalism elected to the office of High Septon. And there is what Gildane describes as almost the sort of backroom deal, whereby a doctrine of exceptionalism supporter will be elected, and then after that, a Hightower will be elected. But what is important in that example is that Jaehaerys and Alysanne don't march into effectively the conclave of Septons and say, all right, and now this is who you're going to elect here. There is still the semblance of a democratic process here. Even if there is this backroom deal, even if there is something that's going on behind the scenes, to the wider world, it looks like there is still the normal democratic process to elect a High Septon. That the most devout are still gathering to choose one of their own who will then become the new High Septon. And that's very explicitly not what happens with Baelor. Baelor, when the High Septon dies, Baelor approaches the most devout, and he doesn't say, choose someone else. No, he tells them, I've chosen, or rather, the gods have chosen. And who did the gods choose? Well, they didn't tell you all who they chose. They told me. And now I'm telling you, and you're going to ratify the choice of the gods that was told through me. And what I think is so powerful about this and so worthy of focus here is, in a way, Baelor is almost usurping the position of High Septon here. You mentioned before he's not naming himself High Septon, and that's true. But in a way, he's almost putting himself above the High Septon. Because what is one of the roles of the High Septon? It's the voice of the Seven on Earth. And that's not just window dressing. Cersei is quite literally being tried for deicide because by having the High Septon murdered, she has killed the gods in the eyes of the faith. But now Baelor is saying, oh, no. Actually, I'm the voice of the Seven on Earth. The gods have told me who is going to rule you, and I'm telling you who that is. You no longer have the power of choice among yourselves. You only have the power to ratify the choice I am making that I was told by the gods. And who am I choosing? Well, it's not any of you. It's not even a Septon. It is quite literally people off the street. Random people that you don't know who have no more connection to the faith of the Seven than literally any other person in Westeros, who are only being chosen because I believe the gods have told me to. And I think that would have been seen as so shocking for both people in Westeros and especially for the most devout, because we know the most devout usually choose from among themselves to rule themselves. Not always. Apparently that doesn't have to be a hard and fast rule, but that's usually the choice that they make. And it's understandable why. It's sort of the same reason we see a lot of classism in elections at the Wall. Because there's a certain level of training that belongs to the aristocracy and the learned classes of Westeros that not everyone gets, again, because of that classism. It's easy for the most devout to elect one of their own because the most devout are in a position to know how to run the Faith of the Seven as a large national institution. A random person off the street doesn't know how to run a large national institution. They have probably no idea what it means to be High Septon. But now Baelor is saying, this is the person who's going to be above you. This is the person who's going to tell you what to do. This is the chosen one of the gods. And you're going to have to listen to them. Why? To teach you humility. To teach you to listen to who the gods choose. Not who you think is the most important. You've clearly gotten too proud for yourselves. So the gods are taking that away from you. And they're going to put above you someone to teach you humility. The way that I'm going to teach you humility.
I love how George chose what's basically the most commoner name in Westeros to really emphasize this point. The two High Septons that were chosen by Baelor were a stonemason named Pate, who I'm referring to. Pate is like the commoner's name, right? Like no member of the nobility is ever named Pate. That is a commoner name. And a draper's son, who we don't even know this guy's name. So
that's the most common name. Of the peasantry
is nameless. Very good point by Ashea there. Yes, that's the actual truth there. Pate is the second most common name. I amend my prior statement. My patement, actually. So, and this is another great example of, is Baelor crazy here? Or is this just really smooth, like hardcore politics where he's making a strong statement, really putting these people in their place, like you said, teaching them humility, which they're supposed to be. This is, again, a very like Jesus-y type moment where he's telling all the rich people to set aside their trappings and remember what this is all about. You're supposed to be helping people and be among the poor. You're not supposed to be an old boys club that always chooses one of their own, which clearly is what they do and what they go back to doing, after all this. But he's showing them their own hypocrisy, holding a mirror up to them and showing them how they're not following their own teachings in a way that reflects better on things that happen in our real world than with what we're used to seeing with religion in this world in a lot of ways. But the problem is that it's difficult to shame and humble people who are this powerful and this proud and not have a lot of pushback. But it still kind of worked, I guess. I mean, they didn't murder him. We don't know if he was murdered at all, though we'll get to the possibility that he was later. Well, maybe they did murder him. I don't think they murdered him. Maybe who knows, actually. But it doesn't seem like there's nothing obvious to suggest that, but they definitely weren't happy about it. And that alone is very interesting.
That also doesn't answer for the fate of the child High Septon either. They
That's
might not
true.
have murdered Baelor, but what they did with the child High Septon is a little bit of a question mark.
Yeah, and do we know what happened to these High Septons either? Do we know the circumstances of the first one replacing the second one? I don't think we even do.
I believe Pate is just said to have died. I don't know if it's ever specified what he died of. I think, if I remember correctly, and I may be wrong about this, I'm thinking off the top of my head, I think the child High Septon was said to have died suddenly.
Suspicious.
And that to me, that kind of implies to me, and to your point, the most devout, I think, on the one hand, at the beginning of Baelor's reign, they're probably thinking, oh, great, a king who's very promoting of the faith of the seven. This is fantastic. This is exactly what we want. But then you've got, they're actually looking at Baelor and they're thinking, oh, he thinks he's above us, though. He thinks he has something like the divine right of kings. And that's not really going to work for us. That's not something that we can really work with. I mean, think about the way that the High Sparrow treats the current most about. Cersei, when she comes into the Great Sept of Baelor, she's looking for the most about that she knows, and she says, oh my gosh, why are you on your knees scrubbing the floor? And the High Sparrow's like, yeah, this is good. That's good labor. He should be doing that. And she's saying, well, where's the other one? He goes, oh, well, he's been confined to a penitence cell because it's sinful for him to be so gluttonous when people are starving. I think that the most devout probably saw Baelor the way that the current most devout might see the current High Sparrow, which is someone who is way more devout in a way they didn't bargain for.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, imagine if the High Sparrow were highborn and born in the Red Keep and ascended the throne through the natural laws of succession that they already had in place, rather than was carried in by his people and installed sort of in a bit of a coup, which is what what the High Septon or the High Sparrow has actually happened in the books. I guess pretty similar in the show as well. This extends into some smaller policies that you can definitely see as related. Now, Davos at one point remembers a piece of a story about King Baelor ordering Lord Belgrave to wash the ulcerous feet of a beggar, which, once again, that is straight from a story from Jesus, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. And I think that, again, just as I think Baelor was trying to humble the most devout by saying, I'm going to put these very lowborn, these commoners, to elevate above you, to teach you this humility, I don't think Baelor was shy about trying to teach his aristocratic subjects humility as well. And, we talked in the first part about Baelor's connection to his father and the way that Aegon III was not afraid to go to the people and to treat with them. I think that Baelor was very much the same. I think that he was going to say, no, none of you are above treating the lowest among you. None of you are above treating the commoner and the small folk as equally worthy to you. And if you think that you are, then I'm going to show you that you're not. You are going to be put in the place of you are the servant and they are the master, at least in this very specific context. I very much believe in keeping with that willfulness of Baelor to show people you're not above the commoners. You are not above them at all. And if you think that you are, I will show you that you're not.
Yeah, so they had a lot of incentive to at least keep that view to themselves, even if they held it as like, don't let Baelor hear you say that. He'll make you wash some feet. Again, it's very difficult to balance like what was just clever politicking and ways for Baelor to try to make change versus what's just a little crazy. And these next two examples they're a little more towards the latter. He promoted the use of chastity belts, which it's just weird and has never in any society that tried it, I think, had positive results. Not that many societies have tried it, but and positive results is kind of in the matter of opinion. But really, it's really hard to argue this one.
It's mostly a historical fiction anyway. But that aside, I think that this is again Baelor. Again, thinks that he is the spiritual father of his realm, that he needs to make sure that the spiritual welfare of his people are protected. And so he can't literally put every woman in their own maiden vault, but he can do something like this, which is sort of a maiden vault in miniature, in a way. It's sort of a local maiden vault that I'm going to protect the chastity and the purity of my female subjects. I might not personally be there to oversee it the way I can with my sisters, but I'm going to reward the obviously male figures who are going to be overseeing this.
Yeah, like you two can have your own maiden vault at home with the chastity belts. Yes, just go to your corner store and King Baelor will subsidize it for you. But even more crazy, perhaps the most egregious example of just willful changing of something in a way that just could never possibly work was his idea to replace messenger ravens with doves, as if any old bird could accomplish this, because he didn't choose another bird based on its approximate capacity to do the same job as a raven. He basically just picked them because doves are associated with peace and the gods. He's like, well, let's pick that bird because that's the most holy bird, so that's clearly the right one. There's no logic to that. It's purely a matter of his faith, and that's where it's hard to argue that he wasn't kind of crazy with that one, huh?
No, it is. And I do think, though, that this is not just Baelor sort of making something up out of thin air. Obviously, it's very impractical, no question about that. But I do think that Baelor had a very specific reasoning behind this. And I think that was to divorce the idea of messengers in Westeros and this practical system of what I'll call, for lack of a better term, mail delivery from any connections with the old gods. What we find out in the World of Ice and Fire, Yandel mentions that Septon Barth noted that the children of the forest could speak through ravens. And that was where this idea of using ravens began. That this was not just tying a piece of paper to a raven's leg, that quite literally, the children of the forest were using magic to communicate messages via ravens. And of course, we do find out that's true via Bran and the Reeds going to Bloodraven's cave. So I think that Baelor, because we know he knows about the unnatural history, and we know that he's not happy with the unnatural history because he does end up banning it, I think he read this and I think he thought, oh, no. I am not having anything in my realm have its origins in the worship of the old gods, in the children of the forest, in the supernatural, and specifically the old god supernatural. I'm not having any of that because that is going against the faith of the Seven. I can't promote something that's connected to the children of the forest when my Andal forebears were the ones who were attacking the children of the forest and driving them out of Westeros. So I think for Baelor, he wants something that is completely separated from the children of the forest, is completely separated from the old gods. We don't want ravens dealing with this. Let's have doves, because doves are a symbol of peace, because doves have nothing to do with the children of the forest. No one's saying the children of the forest can change into doves to send messages. And so a dove will be a way for Baelor to have another messenger bird in his mind that doesn't have anything to do with what he considers heresy.
And if you look at it from the angle that we've been approaching a lot of these things, which is that he's this conundrum of beliefs that don't always fit together, Targaryen and the faith of the Seven, as well as those two don't mesh together. They're both opposed by the faith of the old gods. Both the beliefs of the ancient Valyrians and the beliefs of the faith of the Seven are in opposition to that of the old gods. So it's sort of a double whammy in a lot of ways. Both of his conflicting beliefs don't really mesh with that of the old gods. So yeah, you can see why that would be a problem for him and why he would want to not look on it so kindly, so shall we say. Now, there is a few other policies that he wanted to change. Some of these had to do with peace. Some of these had to do with justice. Let's take a couple examples there.
Speculation on policies.
So the first one is this concept that you've given us here, Nina. This is something I don't know a whole lot about, so I'm going to be listening intently along with our listeners. The idea of oak tree justice, which you believe fits pretty well with Baelor and is inspired by a historical figure that you've referred to several times that we'd like to hear a little more about, and that's Louis IX.
I do think there's a couple ideas specifically connected to Louis IX that, while we don't have specific evidence yet that Baelor did these, I think these are ideas that should George R. R. Martin choose, I think would fit very neatly into the story of Baelor, would have a lot of setup in what he's already established with Baelor and in the world of Westeros that could make a very nice parallel. So Louis IX, just to give a quick note on this, one of the famous stories of Louis IX of France, this famous anecdote of his, is that he was famous as a lawgiver, famous as a justice maker, and where he would do justice is under this oak tree at his chateau of Vincennes, which, again, I'm sorry, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but that's okay. But Louis IX would, supposedly, he would go to Mass, and then after Mass, he would go out into, effectively, this garden area in the chateau of Vincennes, and he would sit under a specific oak tree, and then anyone could come to him and have their case heard and a judgment issued. And he would personally oversee these proceedings. And he would actually even correct his officials if there was an error that they were making. And what he wanted to do was show that he was administering justice personally, that he was approachable, he was humble, he was a just monarch who would hear the troubles of his people, and he would make sure that justice was done no matter their rank. And the reason I think that this is really intriguing as an idea for Baelor is because of what we know about the Godswood specifically at the Red Keep. The one thing we know about the Godswood at the Red Keep, and please divorce this from any notions we have about any of the shows, this is specific to the books, the Godswood at the Red Keep, the heart tree is not a weirwood. The heart tree is an oak tree. The exact same kind of tree that Louis IX was supposedly sitting under when he was doing his justice. And so I could see where Baelor might have been personally interested in this idea of, I'm going to sit under the oak tree of the Godswood of the Red Keep, and then anyone in King's Landing can come to me. I'm not going to sit on the Iron Throne. I'm not going to tower over people the way that my Targaryen ancestors did on this vehicle of conquest, for lack of a better term. I'm going to sit under an oak tree. And not only does that take away, we talked a little bit before about Baelor wanted to divorce his realm from the old gods. Not only does this take away any idea that this oak tree is associated with the old gods, but it also shows I am a king who cares about my people. I am a king who is approachable. I am a king that will make sure that justice is done personally. That just as I am putting resources in the hands of the people, just as I am personally invested in the spiritual welfare of the people, I'm also invested in the legal welfare of my people. I'm not going to bar anyone coming to me. Anyone can come, and I will sit under this oak tree, and I will make sure that justice is done for them.
I think that's a really great idea, too, because it also does, like you said, it kind of undermines the old gods in a way. It says, no, if you're going to go to listen and get wisdom from a tree, do this version of it. Listen to the faith, listen to the new gods, not the old gods. Why listen to a tree when you can listen to Baelor? Yeah, I love that, because it also kind of fits into the idea of some of these old ideas of how some certain pagan religions were replaced by certain Christian traditions, like, the whole idea of the tree and the Christmas tree. I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but it feels sort of similar to that. Very cool. Well, what about this next thing, which was maybe banning trial by combat? It doesn't seem like it would fit with Baelor very well, would it?
No, it doesn't. And again, this is something that I was actually kind of surprised when I was doing research for this episode, is that Louis IX actually did try to ban trial by combat. This was something that really did exist in France. And he did not believe that this was just or right. Now, when I say this, I want to be clear. Louis IX is not the first person in the history of Europe to come up with ideas as to why trial by combat was unjust or ungodly. There were plenty of theologians and other writers who said, trial by combat doesn't make any sense. There are people who are pointing to stories from the Bible where clearly one side wins, even though that should have been the just side. Well, how come they didn't win in a trial by combat? Or there are other theologians who say, well, wait a second. If you think that you believe in trial by combat, then why are you picking the strongest guy? Because shouldn't you just pick anyone? Because clearly if the idea is that, in our world God, or, in the case of Westeros, the gods are on your side, then why does it matter who wins? So clearly you're just a hypocrite who doesn't actually believe, or you're forcing God to perform a miracle for you, which is also not something that you're allowed to do. But with Louis IX specifically, he actually does try to replace trial by combat with something that, in a very loose way, does more resemble what we have today. The idea of you have to present evidence, you have to present witnesses, you're not relying on who's better at swinging a sword at the other person. And this is something that he was very much willing to enforce. He actually, there was a famous case where there was one of the nobles of his realm found these squires on his property, and he hanged them. And then afterward, when he was arrested and charged with their murder, he said, well, I demand a trial by combat. And Louis IX said, no, I'm not actually going to allow you to do a trial by combat. In fact, I'm going to make you pay a fine because you're not allowed to do a trial by combat. That is impious. And so again, because we know so much of Westerosi history and the stories that we hear in Westeros, so many of them are focused on trial by combat, feature trial by combat. I could very much see where Baelor may have been thinking, this is not something that the gods want. This is not something that is okay. We should not be making the gods intervene in our combat. We should be doing justice in a more logical way, in a way that we do need to present witnesses and we do need to present evidence. And so I think it would be very interesting if we had the idea of Baelor saying, no, I'm not going to allow trial by combat, especially because we know, look at the example of Dunk in The Hedge Knight. Dunk is almost unable to fight in a trial by combat because it's Aerion calls for a trial of 7, and Dunk initially doesn't have supporters because he's a nobody. He's a hedge knight. He's a nobody from nowhere, and Aerion is a prince, and a bunch of aristocrats are supporting him. I think Baelor might have seen trial by combat as deeply unfair to the small folk of his realm, who not only don't have martial training, but also are not going to have the ability to call on the strongest and best paid knights of the realm to fight for them. So I would be very curious as to whether or not Baelor would have tried to ban trial by combat during his reign. Obviously, it wouldn't have stuck around, but whether or not this would have been something that he would have tried.
I have a similar suspicion about his view on tournaments. I doubt he would have been a big supporter of spending money on that. About a spectacle of practiced violence would seem like something he would also want to move away from. But I'm not sure he would have banned them, but he probably wouldn't have wanted to spend a lot of money on them either.
Historical comparison.
We've talked a good bit about Louis IX in this episode. Why don't you finish us off today with a good rundown of him so we can have a nice full rounded up comparison of our man Baelor?
I absolutely will. And again, I'm talking about things that surprised me when I was doing the research of this episode. I had always speculated that Louis IX was a source of inspiration for Baelor, but I didn't realize that I was actually more on the money than I thought I was, because I was doing research for this episode, and I went back to my copy of Fire and Blood, because I knew that Baelor was mentioned in some footnote somewhere in there. I have the electronic copy because it's easy for me to search in there, and come to my surprise, I saw Baelor mentioned multiple times, and I thought, I don't remember Baelor being mentioned multiple times. It turns out it helps to look at your electronic copies of books because sometimes they update and you don't realize they do. And in this case, the copy of Fire and Blood actually updated with an interview between George R. R. Martin and a great popular historian by the name of Dan Jones, where George R. R. Martin in part talked about the future of Fire and Blood, what, Fire and Blood Volume 2 or Blood and Fire, whatever it ends up being called. And he starts talking about some of the figures in here. And he specifically says that Baelor is a St. Louis type, is a Louis IX type. And let me tell you, I felt validated.
Hell yeah.
I felt seen. I was like, wow, I correctly predicted that one. Not that I'm going to give myself a ton of credit here, because when you think about very obvious points of comparison in the real world versus A Song of Ice and Fire, I think it's pretty easy to think of Louis IX as a comparison for Baelor, because Louis IX was in fact canonized, and actually he is the only king of France who was ever canonized. And when you look at the story of Louis IX, there are parallels. He comes to the throne a little bit younger than Baelor. He's not 17, he's just 12, and so there is a regency under his mother. But Louis is very, very deeply pious, even by the standards of his day. A piety that is encouraged, actually, by his mother. There's a quote, I'm probably going to misquote this a little bit, but his mother, Blanche, once supposedly told Louis that although she loved him dearly and she loved him more than anyone in the world, she'd rather see him dead than having committed a mortal sin. And that's extremely influential in Louis's piety. And so much so that when he turns 30, he survives this very severe case of malaria, and Louis decides, I'm actually going to go on crusade to commemorate this and to show my devotion to God. And he is a very active participant and leader in the 7th and 8th Crusades, and ends up dying in Tunis during the 8th Crusade. Granted, he doesn't die in battle. He dies of what is probably scurvy. In any event, not a particularly glorious death. And although Louis is no coward, he's certainly capable of leading war. He's also very much willing to make peace, willing to be a peacemaker. So he enters, for example, into a treaty with Henry III of England for settling this question of what we mentioned before, this ongoing tension between England and France over English territories in France. Now, to be clear, we're talking about a period before the 100 Years' War, so we're not quite at that point yet, but these are the tensions that are going to erupt into the 100 Years' War.
Baelor mentioned quite a bit throughout the story. He's a major part of the background, a lot of the world building, and of course a lot of characters carry forward his beliefs, and a lot of his legacy remains in place. And that, my friends, is what we will talk about on our next episode regarding Baelor. Very little of his life remains to discuss, but we have quite a bit to discuss in regards to his death, the circumstances around it, what happened right after, and in general, the legacy that he left behind, because it's pretty substantial. It includes things like, well, Ned Stark being executed right in front of his statue, and how that was not something that made the faith very happy. They didn't really care that it was Lord Stark so much that they profaned Baelor. So this goes to show that his name still carries a lot of power even now, and that matters. And so we're going to discuss that next time. Thank you very much for hanging out with us today, y'all. We will, of course, be back with more. And Nina, thank you for all your great thoughts on Baelor, and I know we have more to come. Remind everybody where to find you, because they need to check out your writings.
They need to check out my ramblings on the Accursed Kings.
They will find that too if they look at your blog.
So I am writing on goodqueenalley.tumblr.com, and that is an alley with how many L's?
Just the one.
Just the one L. So yeah, you can always search on there. I try to be really good about tagging things, and I do in fact have a tag just for the Accursed Kings. And I do have a tag for Baelor as well, so if you want to do more readings on that, you are always welcome to. But I'm always writing on there, and always chatting with the good folks at History of Westeros on their next episode. So
that's right. You know it to be true, my friends, and we will continue with our Westerosi ways in the future. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thanks for your support, and thanks for your questions, and for participating in our communities. And here's some shout-outs to our Patreon supporters. Our Hand of the King is a baseborn manjack, literally just a drunken spearman. Gods help us. Lord Giuliano of House U is Hand of Queen Ashea, known as the Omni Knight. Lord Jim, the fortuitous of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire blog, is Warden of the West. Lord George Stormsville the Cunning is Lord of the Chiliad and Warden of the East. Kabeth the Unfrozen is Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light, Defender of the Old Gods and Warden of the North. Lord Donorus Pular is Head of House Pular, Lord of Amora and Warden of the South. Jenny the Just is Captain of the ghost ship Liberty, which vanished in the Shivering Sea over a century ago, but has recently been sighted near Volantis, if the tales can be believed. King Beyond the Wall, Sidney Jesse, is the Fallborn, Lord of Blue Spring and the Haunted Forest. He wields a dagger of dragon glass and the Valyrian steel blade Red Frost. He really does not understand the concept of a king who deals no violence at all, but he's curious. Sea Lord Sean Gallagher is the Titan's Binger, owner of 9 Valyrian steel ears. The Bastard of the Bay of Seals is a friend of the Night's Watch, commanding a ship made entirely of werewood. Our White Walker patrons include Alexander Greyblood is first of the first men now crowned in ice, called Silence Bringer, Woodblinder, and the Snow of Night. wielder of the ice-forged greatsword Pale Frost. Nevada Pike is fourth of Frost, Frost Kraken, drowned in ice, commander of cats and krakens. Our small council includes Lord Taylor of House Lineberry, Strength of Stone, Will of Iron, Master of Coin. Lord Chris B. of House Baelish, always keep your foes confused, Master of Whispers. Drowned Dan, Lord of House Windsor, Master of Karate, Friendship for Everyone, and Ships. Lord Goodkill McGee, ruler of Castle Over Yonder, Master of Laws. And Grand Maester Scotty. Our lords and ladies in their castles include Lady Direliz of Castle Naki, the Alpha Patron. Lord Dan of the Red Mountains and Castle Great Bell, breaker of the Second Stone. Gregor the Toasty, Lord of the Breadfort. Ashlyn Winter, the Hawk's-Eye, Lady of Castle Skyfall. The Lord of the Halls of Castle Hillcrest, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Machete Everglazed. Lord Bemmy Snugglebunny, Guardian Ranger of the Hidden 100-Acre Werewood, dual wielder of Valyrian short swords Glorious Morning and Little Light Wise. Sharpshooter of the Werewood and Ironwood Laminated Longbow, Todd Von Oben. When you fear things cannot get worse, Snugglebunny enters the fray. The Bastard of the Wolfswood, first Forester of the Old Gods, sworn to House Ironwerewood. Listen for the silence. Casey Stark of House Acres. Peter Rivers, the Pale Dragon and heir to Bloodraven. Lady Mora of House Stark, Archmistress of Apothecaries and Woods Witch. Her castle features werewood doors with painted moons. Lena Snow, the Twilight Star, bastard daughter of Dane, wife of the Trickster and Lady of Castle Rivia. Jason Stark, second son of the North, wielder of the Valyrian steel sword Bloodbath, lord of Castle Whitewood. The chill is real. Suck-ass Gamer, master of soap and clay. Aminda Pinkwolf, lady and ruler of Castle Whitefast. The ice emboldens. Lord Benjen of House Hornwood. Lady Rebecca Stark of Castle Aurora, wielder of a werewood bow with Valyrian steel-tipped arrows and friend of Short Round the Direwolf. Aurelian Matthias Resius, Lord of House Aurelian, ruler of Domus Aurelianus and the Valley of Tanasi, wielder of Sol Invictus, a blade, perhaps, of Valyrian steel. Keeper of the largest collection of books outside the Citadel. We restore the world. Lord Garen of Devil's Hand Keep. Lady Jane of House Celtigar, wielder of the Valyrian steel axe Painkiller. Lord Darian the Daring, wielder of the Valyrian steel sword Wisdom, Lord of House Hollingsworth and the Hollyhold of Dorne. Power in knowledge. Sir Garrett Gabehart, Lord of the Bluegrass. Gabe the Jade Blade, whose foes are skewered and grilled. Lady Maria of House Hightree, Lady of the Castle Fair Oak on the Crooked Lake. Ever watchful. Queen's High Council includes Grand Maester Rennie, whose rod and ring and mask are quartz crystal, wielder of the Valyrian steel pen, fire and ink. The Purple Lord Leo Anansi, Master of Whisperers. Lady Wolfbird, Mistress of the Eastern Rivers, Gatekeeper of the Northern Skies, Daughter of the Silver Sea, and Master of Coin. Devorlin Blackwood, maker of the Frozen Fury Muscle Balm, eucalyptus and mint leaves, washed with Dornish peppers and sealed by fire ants. Master of Laws. Lady Jane of Driftmark, Guardian of Dragonstone, the circling flame burns. Master of Ships. Lady Sonia of Sunspear, Keeper of the Martell Menagerie, Master of Castle Tormira Topanga, Tame and Keep Well. Master of Whispers. Our Kingsguard includes Lord Commander Jackson, Sir Dean the White, Knight of the Black Star, Sir Bateman the Dark Knight. Lady Ani, Bringer of Winter's Warning, Watcher in the Werewood, Bearer of the Wrist Wolves. Lord Jonathan of House Tanner. Lord Raydetto of House Avocado, Protector of the Royal Kitchens, Green in the morning, dark by evening. Our Queen's Guard includes Lord Captain Commander Haema Helminth, the Sellsword Sentinel, James the Green, Lord of the Meadows, Keeper of the Trial of Grasses, Amber the Adamant, the Knight of the Mist and Mother of Squids, the Wintry Wolverine, we finish what you begin, Nora Neko, Archmaester Vena, whose ring, rod, and mask are made of steel, not pudding. Laura Boros, the Lady of Infinity. Our Beard Guard includes Lord Commander George the Golden, Lady Rita of the Coppermane, the Unbound, Dance the Fervor. Sir Jeff, Warden of the AC, wielder of Triad, the multifaceted beard of platinum, red, and brown. Stay Frosty. Bloody Ben Blackwood. Big Brian Blackwood. Davin Mack, Knight of the Reeds, the Bog Knight. And the History of Westeros Night's Watch, led by Lord Commander Richard the Ligerheart, wielder of Barry's Anklebreaker, a flail with blue and silver Valyrian steel spikes. Go Blue! And First Builder Magor Snow, aka Magor the Cool, the fire in the snow. First Ranger Liam, aka Sir Waiting on a Nickname. And First Steward Sir Zach of House Wild, Lord Shredder of the Spiral, wielder of the Valyrian steel axe Grail. And you know what to do until next time. It's the same as always. Valar Rereadus. Not Valar Reburnus.